What is going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is Dog Talk with your host, Holden. Glad to have everybody here today as we get prepared for another episode. Kind of a big one. Kind of a big episode is what we've got going on this week. We are recapping the Kentucky game from this past weekend. I know it's a little bit later than most of you guys probably care for it, but regardless, we're going to recap it. And then we also are going to go ahead, like I was saying, the last episode that we were probably going to do this is end up doubling this episode up. So we're going to recap the Kentucky game from last week, and we're going to go ahead and preview the Georgia Tech game coming up this week on Saturday. Obviously, with it being Thanksgiving weekend, usually when I would record the preview episode is between Wednesday and Thursday. Most of the time it's Thursday night, and I'm just not going to do that during Thanksgiving. I'm going to spend that time with my family just like you guys should. So, but regardless, we're going to jump to some things. We're going to go, like I said, through those things. Look at how absolutely awful my picks were this past week. They are just about as bad, if not as bad, as Texas A&M's football team this football season. But anyway, we'll at least look at them, and we're going to talk about some that I decided to go ahead and pick again this week and go heavy with it again. So we got a lot to get to. College football playoff ranking came out. I am recording this on Tuesday, so that has dropped. We'll go through some of that. This is not really a lot of surprise in it. The main conversation was going to be, all right, who's going to be in that 5 spot? Who's going to be in that 6 spot? Who are those teams that are right there on the edge that are looking from the outside looking in? Who's going to be those guys waiting to see if they have an opportunity to depend on what happens with the top 4? And we're going to kind of look at some of the scenarios that could happen. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because this week could determine most of it. Not going to say it determines all, but next week is also a critical one as well for these teams that are sitting right there in 5 and in 6, even 7 and 8, because I do think that those teams in 7 and 8 are also right there on the outside looking in as well. So that's kind of what we've got. Recapping, previewing. Let's jump straight to it. Starting things off very simply with this Kentucky game from this past weekend. Was not a very beautiful game at all. It never felt like Georgia was ever in danger of losing this football game, but it never felt like never felt like Georgia was going to be in danger of losing this football game. But it also never felt like Georgia was just going to run away with it like we were kind of hoping. And part of me did kind of sit back and at least go, okay, I mean, eventually something's got to break, right? And it never did. All night long, it never did. We never had runs that just blew you away. We never had passes that were just like, oh, there we go. That was beautiful. Never had anything that made you just go, man, that looked good. It was just a cold football game where Kentucky held on to it. And surprisingly, what blew my mind was looking at the time of possession at the end of this game, because that should have been something last week that I noticed was the fact that more than likely Kentucky's going to do everything they can to hold the ball. They pulled Georgia in the fact that the second quarter of this football game, they had like an 8.5 to 9 minute drive as well. So it's really weird to look, like I said, at time of possession at the end of this, and that's not a key factor in these games. That's generally why I don't look at something like that, because you take a Tennessee and you say, okay, well, Tennessee might hold the ball for, 5.5, 6 minutes in the first half of a football game, and you're like, man, they didn't have the ball at all. Well, guess what? They can also turn around and score 63 points, or somebody can score that on them. But regardless, I digress. That's some stuff we're going to get to here in just a minute as well. That's not a big key to this, but I was still surprised to look at the end of the football game that this did not go the way that I thought it would as far as time possession was. The way that it felt like this football game was going was that Kentucky was just holding the ball the entire time, not even give Georgia's offense an opportunity to get on the field. And that's really not the case. Looking at some of the stats, team-wise and player-wise, Stetson Bennett, not his best night. 13 for 19 percentage-wise and completion-wise. It's like, oh, that's not too bad of a number. We only threw the ball 19 times in this football game. That's another thing. When I look back at it, I was like, wow. I really thought that maybe we gave it more effort, which we did. We did run the ball very, very heavily. And, I mean, literally by looking at that, we threw the ball 19 times. By looking at that and running the ball in this football game 46 times. I don't know that Georgia's ran the ball 46 times in a football game in a long time. I don't know. You could probably add a couple of those total rush and carries in football games together to reach that in this one football game. But Stetson, 13-19, 116 yards, no touchdowns, had the one interception on the night. And then on the ground, Kenny McIntosh had himself a very good night. 19 carries, 143 yards, one touchdown. DeJohn Edwards, 14 for 50. Kendall Milton, 6 for 31. Stetson also rushed it 5 times for 25 yards in this game. So we rushed the ball 46 times, 247 yards, only one touchdown. Kind of crazy, too, to look and say Georgia only scored one time in this football game. And it came in the third quarter. Was the first time we reached the end zone in this football game. Really, really weird. Thank goodness for Jackpot in this game. Again, he put up 9 points by himself, kicking in the first and then in the second quarter, kicking a couple there as well. So it was very weird to watch this kind of unfold the way that it did. On the other side of the ball, I mean, Will Levis, he was very slow. He was very slow as well. It took until that really third and fourth quarter where they had a really big drive and driving down to score for them to find the end zone and then go for 2 and didn't get it. But we're literally on their 1 or 2 yard line, and we go for it on fourth down. This is the first time all season that Georgia has not completed a fourth down conversion. I'll look at what the numbers actually were on that here in just a minute. But first time we weren't able to convert. First time we didn't get in the end zone, being right there at it as well. Again, our percentage was really high, where I think only one time we have been in the red zone all season and didn't score. And this made the second time, as well as it making it the first time that we didn't complete a fourth down try in a football game. And that was it. It was on their 1 yard line. They drove it all the way down the field. They marched it all the way down the field there in the fourth quarter to score on Georgia's defense for the first time all night, and that would be it, though. They would get that one touchdown, would go for 2, and would not get that to try to cut it in half, making it 16-8, and that didn't happen. So we end up stopping that. That makes it 16-6, and that's what it finaled at. That's what it finaled out. Will Levis did throw 206 yards, that one touchdown, and also had a pick on the night. They ran the ball 25 times, and we held them to 89 yards. 89 yards as well. Dominique Blaylock was the leading receiver for Georgia, 38 yards. Ladd had 28, Kenny Mack 19, Marcus Roseman Jack St. 10. Crazy thing is, Brock Bowers was targeted twice in this game, maybe 4 times, but I know twice with receptions, 10 yards. Just a strange night, very, very strange night, the way that things went. But I think a lot of this was, again, get in here, get out of here. Get in here, try to do exactly what one of the keys, which we're going to look at in just a minute, one of the keys to the game was, which is getting out of here healthy. Really only end up with 1 sack on the night, and that was between Javon Bullard and Robert Beal Jr. as well. They held Jalen Carter in check fairly well in this football game, which I was impressed by. There were still 5 tackles for loss in this game regardless. Smile Munden Jr. ends up leading the charge on it, 4 solo tackles, 11 of which are total. Malachi Starks was all over the field on this game as well. He looked very good. Jamon Dumas Johnson continuing it, and Christopher Smith as well. The one interception on the night was the one that I wanted to look at. Yeah, it was Keeley. Keeley got another interception. And this was, I tweeted this out at the time. You guys make sure you follow us on Twitter at DogTalk20. But when he picked the ball off, I think it might have been even in the end zone. I started hollering again, "Go Keeley, run Keeley!" And I started having flashbacks of national championship game. But I tweeted that, hey, that was the best return I've seen since or maybe I don't even remember. I don't even remember what the tweet was now. I don't remember if I said that it was reminded me of that, or if I said, hey, that's the best return I've seen since the national championship. But anyway, I digress. It doesn't matter that much. But kind of jumping over to some of the team stats that I did want to look at total-wise. Again, fourth down. This is the first time Georgia didn't do it. 0 for 1 on the night. That's the time that we went. Georgia had 363 total yards in this game. Kentucky had 295. But again, time of possession, where I thought Georgia would have trailed in this, they actually led 30 minutes and 2 seconds to 29 minutes and 58. So very, very split, very even. Georgia had a few penalties in this game. Both teams turning the ball over one time to one another in this football game. So wasn't pretty, wasn't the nicest looking win, wasn't what you would think the number 1 team in the country would come out and just put on them. But regardless, that's what it ended up being. Let's look at the keys that we were looking at coming into this game. Offensively, it was no turnovers. Okay, X on that because we still had the 1 turnover from Stetson throwing the pick. Then you look at a couple of other things biggest thing to me, which was getting out with no injuries. Balling out, we didn't do that. We did not ball out in this football game. Kenny Mack did. He had a great night. Again, over 140 yards in this football game. And the one sole touchdown we had was Kenny Mack. So he balled out. But as far as everything else goes, other than the defense, I'm looking offensively right here, and we didn't do that. So no injuries. That was a good thing to at least report out of this. We seem to be coming out of it at least healthy, which I think, again, was one of Kirby's keys to the game was let's get in here. It's not going to be the easiest game. We're coming off a couple of tougher games, a tough game on the road against Mississippi State last week. So let's get in here, do what we have to do, win this football game. Don't look ahead. You got Georgia Tech next week, followed by LSU in the SEC Championship game December 3rd. Let's get in here. Do our job. It doesn't have to look pretty. Just win. Just win and you're fine. So, came out okay on that. But no turnovers, ain't. Ball out, not really. Did it again. No injuries was a big one. And that's not necessarily even a key to the game as much as it's a key to getting out of the game, I should say. But then defensively, affect the quarterback. We did okay at that. There were times where Will Levis had a lot of time to throw back there. And then there were other times where we were at least putting pressure on the pocket and actually making him a little uncomfortable there and a little inaccurate. But he still ended up having a decent night at least. We did stop the run. Did that effectively. Did not win the turnover battle again. It ends up 1-1 on it. So that ends up being our key to the game, at least for that. Again, not necessarily what I would say is the greatest football game. But again, I think a lot of this at this point in time, it was get in here, do your job, do what you have to do to win the football game, and get out of here. Get out of here because we have bigger fish to fry. And that's kind of what I was talking about when we were coming into this game. We just need to come into this game, get out of here healthy, handle our business for these next couple of weeks, get to the SEC Championship game, and then at that point, when we get to that game, that's when we got to handle business. And I say that because a lot of the conversation right now about the expansion of the college football playoff, everything that is entailed in that as well, is starting to kind of irk on me a little bit more and more because the more and more I get to thinking about it, we've talked about SEC championship game and things of that nature. All of a sudden, that game does actually start to become a little less interesting. I mean, Georgia, since 2016, when Kirby Smart came to Georgia and took over for Georgia, Georgia has been to the SEC championship game, 17. Didn't win it. Lost then. No, excuse me. Won it in 17 against Auburn. Went in 18 and lost it. Went in 19, lost it. Didn't go in 20. Went in 21, lost it. Here we are going back to 22. So, in the time that Kirby Smart has been here, four times, I guess? 17, 18, 19, and 21. 4 times we've gone to the SEC championship game. Only once has Georgia won the SEC championship. One time. And all the time that Kirby's been here since 2016 season, Georgia has got one SEC championship game. Now, granted, you've got 2 national championship appearances and 2 college football playoff appearances, and you're 3-1 in the college football playoff era since you've been there at least. But and you've got a national championship, but you only have one SEC championship game. So and I know Kirby, I think he's feeling the same way about this. Let's start winning it. Let's get to that game and actually win it instead of losing. And, yeah, you may still get in the playoff like we did last year. But let's win it. Let's go out there and win that game too and prove to the SEC as well, hey, we're still the best in the SEC. Because even though you won the national championship last year, playing in the SEC championship game, the strange part about it was you lose to who you would eventually win the national championship over. You didn't necessarily win the SEC, but you still won the national championship against the team that beat you in the SEC. So it's all kind of mixed and confused. But let's win it. Heck, let's go out there and win it. I mean, again, we only have one over the past few years. Let's add another one to that because right now, to me at least, it's still important. Right now, while we're still in a 4-team playoff, as long as that platform stays right there, the SEC championship game still matters. And in years past, it kind of hasn't. And I understand that. 2017, Alabama didn't make it. They didn't win the SEC, but they still won the college football playoff and the national championship that year. 19, LSU won it, and they won the whole thing. That's the way I like to see it. Not necessarily that you have to go undefeated in the season like they did, but to win the SEC, then to turn around and win the national championship game. Same thing in 21. Georgia goes to it. They don't win it, but they still get in the playoffs and they win the national championship. Sometimes it doesn't matter, which does kind of make it a little bit tougher when the committee starts to talk about, okay, these championships and winning your league, that matters. The SEC has kind of been since at least 2017, and I'm not thinking a whole lot further before Kirby at this point, because again there weren't that many years before. 2 years before when the college football playoff era actually began. I guess you could go back to the Penn State getting shooed and not getting put even though Ohio State did, and they didn't play for their conference championship. So this has been going on since the college football playoff started, but especially for the SEC. And 9 times out of 10, it's I mean, I hate to say it, it's Alabama that somehow slips around, having to even play in that game, stays healthy, gets to the national championship, ends up eventually winning it. Not saying that happens every time, but it does seem like that's a little bit of a conversation. So I kind of agree with Kirby right here. Let's go. Let's get in this game and let's win it. We got to take care of Tech first. We're getting there. We're going to talk about it here coming up in just a minute where we get to preview that. But I'd like to win the SEC as well. I'd like to have that under your belt and say, hey, not only did we defend the SEC East, by the way, for 2 back-to-back years, consecutive years, Georgia 21 and 22 seasons has gone 8-0 in the SEC and undefeated in the SEC East back-to-back years. The last time that happened was 08-09 season for Alabama, and before that was like 95-96 for Florida in the SEC at least. And I think it's 98 was when all that kind of came to fruition, where there was actually a championship game between the two. So, but it's kind of cool to be, I guess, in that kind of a conversation, at least with some of those teams. And Georgia's going to see if they can't continue that for the years to come, and maybe set a new standard. I know Kirby's doing everything he can to set a standard for what it takes to come to Georgia, what it takes to win, what to be a national champion contending, but also to be fighting for your own national championship for these guys who were not a part of that team last year. So I'm excited to see what happens, but I'd like to go and win this SEC championship game as well. Obviously, we have to get to Tech before we can do that. But that's kind of really all I have on Kentucky. I'm not going to harp too deep on it. Again, it just wasn't a pretty game. It wasn't the most fun to watch. It wasn't all that great. The only good thing about it was the teams below us did the same thing. So it wasn't just Georgia that had a really quiet and kind of crappy and boring game. Michigan did it. Ohio State did it. TCU did it. Tennessee just kind of flat out. We're going to talk about it. Let's look at some of these games from last week before we jump into the preview here. Again, Georgia wins at 16-6 over Kentucky. Was glad to see it at least. Ohio State, the number 2 team in the country, 43-30. Looks like a good game. Looks like Ohio State handled business. They did not. They didn't. The score may say it, but they didn't. Ohio State at one point was only up in this game by 6, I think, at one point, before getting a strip fumble, whatever you want to call it, in the end zone of Maryland and just picking it up for a touchdown. I think they may have even called it a interception. I don't really know what they called it. Strip sack, fumble, whatever it was. And Ohio State scored right there at the end of the football game with like 9 seconds left to make it 43-30. Otherwise, this game was a whole lot closer as well, just like Georgia, Kentucky, just like Michigan, who took a last-second field goal. I say last second. There were a few seconds left on the clock. But Michigan, they won it at the end of the football game, 19-17 over 7-3 at the time, Illinois. TCU ran the field goal team on the field to win the game 29-28 over Baylor at Baylor, at the time a 6-4 team. So all of these top 5 teams, they all kind of sat back and they were like, oh Lord, I almost took my whole desk out. They were all kind of in a struggle zone, whatever you want to call it, because it just wasn't the prettiest weekend for the top 5, wasn't the prettiest weekend for the top 10. But it was a weekend. It was a great weekend of football. Any of these games you watched, even though they were tight like that and games that they shouldn't be, like we talked about last week, later in the season, you should be able to take care of business against these teams that you should. There's some teams that you're going to play that it may not necessarily be that way. If you're playing an undefeated team like we're going to have coming up this coming weekend, if you're playing a team who's only got 1 or 2 losses. Those are going to be tough games. Those are hard-fought wins if you can get those wins. But it's when you start playing a team, who's 4-6, who's not very good, who looks like they could be but doesn't really have any life. Those are the teams that you should take care of handedly. None of which I'm not going to say that Kentucky's not one of those teams. I'm not going to say that Maryland is. Illinois is certainly not terrible. Baylor has shown fight. And by the way, TCU took Baylor out last year from getting to the college football playoff. Baylor had the opportunity to do that at TCU right here, and they almost did it. TCU got very lucky there at the end to win that football game. And then you have Tennessee. Tennessee, who's traveling to a 6-4 South Carolina, and South Carolina obliterates Tennessee 63-38. At one point, I think this game was like 42-20 something, and I'm sitting back going, man, I think it even got to 56-20 something, and I was like, South Carolina is putting the business on Tennessee right now, which was, quite frankly, just fun to see. Man, it was awesome. Beamer ball, go ahead with it. Yeah, with that final, number 5, Tennessee, 38, South Carolina, 63. And then we move on, and South Carolina beat Tennessee 63-38. Man, what a whooping. And then LSU, they took care of UAB 41-10. Tennessee falls to South Carolina 63-38. USC, UCLA, that was a big one. That was a big matchup there in the Rose Bowl for the first time. Not necessarily the first time that it was a big matchup, but it's kind of come back to life because I think in the years past this game has not been quite what it used to be back in the day. But number 7, traveling to number 16, UCLA, finishes it by a field goal, 48-45. USC holds on to stay in that one-loss category, moving to try to play for the Pac-12 championship. They got to take care of business against a tough team in Notre Dame coming up this week, but we're going to kind of look at some of those games as well. Alabama handles Austin Peay, I guess, okay, 34-0. I really expected this to be at least 114-0, but I digress. Clemson 40-10 over Miami. You should, because Miami is one of those teams that should not be hanging around with anybody at all. They are one of the 5-5 teams at the time who you don't struggle with. If Clemson had struggled in this game, I'd really be nervous to see what's going to happen with them moving forward. I was glad to see them put 40 points on the board. I'm going to be honest with you. 40-10, not bad. Oregon, finally, for the first time in a 3-game slate, taking down Utah 20-17 after Utah beating them twice last year. So that was cool to see there at their house. Penn State handling Rutgers. Georgia Tech upsetting North Carolina 21-17. That's who we've got coming up this week. They're fighting for bowl eligibility, sitting at 5-6, but they're coming to Georgia to try to do that. Arkansas absolutely shellacks Ole Miss in another upset of the week, 42-27. Kansas State handling West Virginia 48-31. Notre Dame smacking Boston College 44-0. FSU, they continue to roll 49-17 over Louisiana. Navy upsetting UCF 17-14. Oklahoma upsetting Oklahoma State 28-13 to get to bowl eligibility. Louisville upsets NC State 25-10. And then Cincinnati take care of Temple 23-3. So that kind of rounds out some of the bigger games and even some that weren't necessarily all that exciting from last week. That was at least last week, and I've got to pull it up at least, even though I really don't want to. Sorry, you guys, if you guys are hearing some sound. I thought I turned my sound off, but just make sure you guys are hearing me here. All right, sorry. My sound was kind of cutting in and out on me there. But anyways, looking at it here, make sure I've got all my stuff pulled up. That's kind of what last week looked like, but I've got to go back to my Week 12 picks, which I'm not very excited about. Not very excited about because this is what it looked like. I'll pull it up on the screen for you guys here. This was last week. It wasn't pretty. I ended up on this 8 pick is what I call it. The team I pick is worth 1, and then the spread, if I take it, is worth 1 as well. I ended up 2-6. I thought I'd go heavy. I felt good about at least going 6-2 and kind of padding the stats, so to speak. That didn't happen. Georgia won. They did not cover. Tennessee lost. I did have South Carolina covering, which I thought would happen. So I'm looking 2-2 there. I was like, it's not too bad. Vandy upsets Florida. By the way, I didn't talk about that. Hello, Vandy on a 2-game winning streak in the SEC after not winning one since 2019. Since 2019, all of a sudden they're on a 2-game streak. Tennessee, they're coming for you. You better be ready. That's why the spread against Vandy for Tennessee this week is only 14. They went to South Carolina, had a 22-point spread, and couldn't cover it. Matter of fact, South Carolina whooped them. They're headed to Vandy. How awesome would that be to see Vandy a 3-game SEC winning streak? I think that would put them bowl eligible as well if they're not anyway. But anyways, regardless, Vandy upsets Florida, lose both of those. Arkansas shellacks Ole Miss, lose both of those to go 2-6. What an awful week! It was an awful week for my picks that week. So I'm hoping that I can kind of turn some of that around because, that's all I can say. Because that one hurt. That one hurt. It hurt, and it hurt bad. All right. That's last week. Week 12's over. It's in the bag. We're halfway through this episode. Let's go ahead and get geared up and ramp it up for this following week, or this next week. We got Georgia Tech. It's hate week. Rec Tech. It's not the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Now that I just finished talking about Florida, it's got my mind on that. But it is at least, oh my goodness, every week, every year that this game comes up, I keep forgetting the exact wording of it. Yeah, I mean, it's blank. I'm blank, just completely blank on what we call this week. I like to call it Rec Tech because that's just what I've always thought of it as, but it's not the greatest outdoor hate game. Why do I have the cocktail party in my mind? Everybody that's listening right now, or if you're watching on YouTube, God, this is what it is. How do you not know this? How do you do a Georgia podcast and you can't think of it? I can. It's right there. Just won't come out. It's just bouncing around in my head right now, and I can't get it to come out. Anyways, it'll come to me. It'll come to me at one point, or at some point or another. So Georgia, moving forward, the number one team in the country right now in the college football playoff. I do want to look and at least say, hey, these are the teams. This is what we got. Top so-and-so in the college football playoff poll right now. You can see at least the top 5 that are scrolling across the bottom of the screen. If you guys are watching on YouTube, I appreciate it. Make sure you guys hit that like button and subscribe as well if you hadn't already. Top 4 is exactly the same. Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, TCU. Then you got LSU at 5. USC at 6, Alabama at 7, Clemson 8, Oregon 9, Tennessee 10. That's the way things line up. I do want to pull one thing up real quick, just to look at. This was my preseason picks as far as the college football playoff picture went. I figured Ohio State would be 1, Georgia 2, Clemson 3, Alabama 4, and I thought this was a pretty decent thing. You know, Georgia I still figured would go undefeated. And had Alabama with the 1 loss at Tennessee. They ended up losing 2 games. Kind of surprising there. But regardless, this is kind of how I had it lining up. Thought this might be a decent little chunk of it. And all of a sudden, as I kind of look at it, what would it take? And I'm not saying this is going to happen, but this is what I think it would take for this scenario to work out. In this scenario, for Ohio State to be first, I think Ohio State has to absolutely obliterate Michigan. That's the first thing. They have to beat the snot out of them. And Georgia has to beat LSU, but it has to be a bit of a struggle. Maybe overtime, maybe not looking good, maybe having to come from behind to win the game in the SEC championship game. That's what I'm thinking at least. And Ohio State obviously going on and winning the Big Ten. So that would put Ohio State 1. That might put Georgia 2 there if you're struggling. Maybe even if you struggle with Georgia Tech and then, obviously 2 and 3 are playing behind you. That's an opportunity for doing that. But then beating LSU regardless. Then that puts 1 and 2. Fairly easily, you could see that. Now, for Clemson to be 3rd and Alabama be 4th, this is what you have to have happen. Michigan, again, has to get their doors blown off by Ohio State, not playing in a Big Ten championship game. TCU probably has to fall this week as well as in the Big 12, or at least one of those 2, and they probably drop out. At that point, you have LSU at 3rd and USC at 4th, Bama 7. At that point would be 5th. Clemson would then at that point be 7th. So, or 6th. Sorry, I'll get my numbers straight here in a minute. But that's kind of what it would take as far as that movement. But then to get Alabama at 4th, you would still have to have LSU again losing. But then that's close. Then you get an LSU. Well, you got to drop LSU. They're 3 loss. At that point, Alabama's still a 2 loss. But then you got USC, who at that point in time would be, let's see, I believe, yeah, Alabama 2 loss. Sorry, my sound keeps jumping up on me, and I'm trying to make sure it isn't coming through to you guys. Simple. Michigan's got to get blown out by Ohio State. TCU has to fall. LSU loses to Georgia. USC loses probably to Notre Dame this weekend, possibly even in the Pac-12 if they get to that championship game. I don't know how it lines up over there. They're out, and all of a sudden you have an Alabama team who's back in it, even though they're not playing for anything as long as they beat Auburn this week. And then you have Clemson, who if they win out and win against South Carolina this weekend and then win the ACC championship as well, that I think because they would play in the SEC or the ACC championship game, that would put them at 3rd. That would jump them over Alabama. This is a wild scenario if this was to happen. Again, some crazy stuff has to happen, such as Michigan getting boat raced by Ohio State this week, and then Ohio State taking care of the Big Ten. Georgia struggling with Georgia Tech this week, or taking care of business, but maybe struggling with LSU in the SEC championship game. That takes LSU out right there. Boom. Takes Michigan out right there. Boom, they're gone. Now you got TCU. They either lose this week or lose in the Big Ten championship. Boom, they're gone. All of a sudden, USC sitting there. Let's say they lose to Notre Dame this week. Boom, they're gone. Then you have Alabama and Clemson. They are the next 2 teams up who are sitting there, and right behind them is Oregon and Tennessee. Those 2 teams aren't going to jump up past them. So then, why not? Alabama doesn't have to play anything as long as they beat Auburn. Okay, we'll have Clemson beat South Carolina, who beat the snot out of Tennessee right now. And then all of a sudden they win the ACC, and it's like, okay, yeah, let's jump Clemson over Alabama, put them 3. Now you got Georgia and Clemson playing Ohio State and Alabama. All of a sudden this looks like a scenario that could happen. Again, I don't think it's going to happen. This is just me trying to make my preseason prediction play out. But again, I don't believe this is going to happen, so let me preface by saying that again. If I was a guessing man, I'd say this is probably going to end up Georgia, Michigan, TCU, and Ohio State. Unfortunately, I think that's going to leave USC out, but we're going to see. Luckily, I'm not the one who has to make the decisions when it comes to this. I'm not the one who has to say, hey, this is what's got to happen. This is who I think. This is why. But we're going to get to that. We're going to start with Georgia Tech this week and look at what Georgia Tech looks like. We're going to look at some of these other games around the country because there are some big ones here in Rivalry Week, which is always fun and exciting. And then we're also going to go through the picks of this week, and you'll see kind of how I at least think this week is going to go. But getting to Georgia Tech first. That's the big one. Starting things off, Georgia does come into this season, or coming into this week, top of the defense. Again, top of the country in the defense category as far as points per game goes at 11.1. We are 11th in the country offensively, 38.4. That number's kind of dropped a little bit, but starting to look really, really good on defense. We're kind of keeping up with the pace from last year, how Georgia's offense and defense fared last year in a national championship season. So that's kind of an exciting thing to think about. On the other side of things, as far as Georgia Tech goes, Georgia Tech, not a very impressive team. Not a very impressive team coming into this game. They've kind of surprised me with some of the wins that they have. Again, they're looking to be bowl eligible. They're 5-6 coming in this football game, looking to be bowl eligible. The past 5, let's see, Georgia Tech hasn't beat Georgia since 2016. I think the first season under Kirby Smart, Georgia Tech beat Georgia, but since then they have not. And it's been fairly lopsided. And by the way, Georgia Tech beat Georgia 28-27 in that first one. For Kirby there in 16. But then in 17, Georgia handled business. 18, Georgia handled business. 19, obviously didn't play in 20 for the first time ever. But they do in 21. But since then, 38-7, 45-21, 52-7, 45-0 last year. So you have some pretty big games in there and some lopsided victories there on the Georgia way, at least. So it's one thing to think about. But Georgia shouldn't struggle in this game. This is a game, like I said, I'll get to the keys. I'll just pull them up right now for you guys. Offensively, I think we have to start fast. Start fast. Last week we started what it looked like at first we were going to kind of rock on with it, and then it just kind of meandered from there. Again, really slow, cold, quiet, strange football game last week against Kentucky. I'd love to come into this one. Let's start fast. Start fast and get rocking and rolling. No dumb penalties. And a lot of this I'm going to put back on George Pickens from a few years ago. Throwing somebody into a wall, getting ejected. I think he was out for the first half against Alabama in the SEC championship game that season. So this is one of those things. No dumb penalties. Come in here, handle your business, play within yourself is the final one. Play within yourself, do your job, get in here, win this football game offensively. No turnovers is one I can have in there each and every week, but I want to try to change it up a little bit. My goodness, we turn the ball over every single game. I would love to not see that, but it doesn't matter if I put it as a key to the game or not. We're still going to do it. So let's start this thing fast. Can't have these dumb penalties. When you have these dumb penalties, all of a sudden, one, it hurts your team, but it also starts to get you where you're in a situation that you shouldn't be. You know, Alabama faced that against Tennessee, and I hate to use them as an example, but Tennessee had it as well. I think I meant to say Texas, but even Tennessee. But some of these games that you should be able to take care of business, penalties kind of help keep the other team around. So can't have dumb penalties in here, and then again, just play within yourself and get the job done. Defensively, let's pressure the quarterback. I think getting in the quarterback's face, some sacks, tackles for loss, all of this is good news. We got to tackle too. I noticed last week, even playing Kentucky, and in weeks past, we've had trouble where instead of wrapping guys up, we just kind of bump off of them. We're not tackling guys. They're getting more yardage, or we're thinking we're tackling them, and they just keep going. And then the last thing, let's force some turnovers. I'd love to see a few more turnovers in here. Not necessarily winning a turnover battle as much as it's just let's get some turnovers in general. Let's get that number back on our side a little bit as we get ready for the SEC championship game following this. But I do think at least one other thing to kind of note, again, like I said earlier, I don't think it's a key to the game as much as it's a key to getting out of the game offensively and defensively. Get healthy. That's part of the reason I say on offense, start fast. Start fast. Let's get up, and by halftime, I would love to see Stetson Bennett ride the bench. I'd love to see some Carson Beck action as we get prepared to see what he's going to be next season for us. That's what I'd love to see. Start getting, Branson Robinson some even more carries coming into this football game. Those are some of the things I'd love to see as we get into this game. Start it fast, no injuries, get out here injury-free, preparing for LSU next week. We're not looking ahead. This is the game we've got on slate for this week, but we can still kind of be prepared somewhat for it at least, right? Right? Right. So that's all there is to it. Then kind of looking, let's see, make sure I got my picks coming up here in a minute. Prediction on it, I hadn't put any of this stuff up. I'll get all these graphics out for you guys on social media. Make sure you guys follow us on Twitter at DogTalk20, as well as over on Instagram as well. And again, for you guys watching on YouTube, I appreciate it. But I'm picking it 44-3. 44-3. Similar to last year, we went at 45-0. I kind of felt 44-6 might be something, maybe a couple of field goals, maybe some late movement by Georgia Tech there. But this defense, the way that we have played these past few weeks, looks very, very good. Even against Mississippi State, allowing them to score 19 points in the football game does not scare me that much. This defense is really good. Again, giving up 11.1 points a game looks very good. Very, very good. I really don't anticipate seeing Georgia Tech moving the football all that effectively against this defense, especially not trying to run the ball. So 44-3, I think our offense does start fast. I think we come alive. I think even in the second half, getting some of this back up, getting some of these guys more experience in this game, I think still produces points. I still think we score even in the second half of this football game with other guys on the field, as well as our defense being able to hold them back to hopefully just 3 points. Again, 44-3 is the pick that I have on it, and that's it. I think we handle business against them. I still can't. World's outdoor. All I can think about is Jacksonville right now. Greatest outdoor hate? No. Why? History of hate. Hated history. I did that too in high school, but I digress. It'll eventually come to me. I mean, it has to. It has to, right? A lot of me wants to Google right now why I can't think of what I'm trying to think of. But to be honest with you, I don't really know. Let me just do it. I got to. Like, seriously. It's blowing my mind this much that I can't think of what we call. Oh, I got all kind of sound playing. Oh, it doesn't matter. You can't hear it. Sorry, I know this is some this is terrible as far as you guys listening go. What do they call it? What do they call the rivalry? Clean old fashioned hate. My goodness. I could not for the life of me remember that. Everybody that's listening to this is going, "You idiot. How do you not know that?" I do know it. I just could not think of it to save my life. But regardless, it's over now. Clean old fashioned hate. That's what we got this week. We're going to do some clean old fashioned hate. Evidently, I just unplugged my light. Regardless, I'll just lean forward to some other light here. Clean old fashioned hate. Georgia's going to take care of Tech, wrecking Tech this weekend, 44-3. Sorry, now I'm kind of all out of wits. All right, let's get to some of the other football games around the country for this weekend. Some of the other big ones on Thursday, you got Mississippi State at Ole Miss. Ole Miss only a 2-point favorite at the house. Anytime I've seen Ole Miss this close of a line, they seem not to be able to take care of business. And by the way, I'm done. I'm done putting them on the line. Anytime I've ever taken Ole Miss in a spread for the past 2 years, they have not done me well and have crapped the bed. So maybe by not taking them, they end up winning, especially with Lane headed to Auburn after this game. Regardless, that's 7 o'clock on Thursday. You get to watch a nice night game there on Thanksgiving, which will be sweet. Then we move to Friday. A couple of the big ones in this one. 19 Tulane at 24 Cincinnati. Cincinnati hanging out there in the top 25 of the college football playoffs. That one at lunch. Then you got Baylor at Texas. That should be a good one. NC State, North Carolina. Don't sleep on that one. UCLA and California. Yeah. This is one I'm excited about here, though. I look kind of silly doing that there on YouTube. But anyway, you got Florida at Florida State. By the way, again, let me just, in case I didn't say this earlier, Florida lost to Vandy last week. Florida State's going to beat the snot out of Florida. 7:30 on ABC. That's Friday night. Then we get to Saturday. Clean old-fashioned hate. There it is. Georgia Tech at Georgia. Georgia Tech trying to get bowl eligible. It's not going to happen, though. 12 o'clock ESPN. Georgia's only a 35.5-point favorite, and the over-under on this one's 49, so hello all the points to Georgia. The big one of the weekend, I mean, that's all there is to it, is number 3 at number 2, Michigan, Ohio State. 2 undefeateds in the Big Ten. It determines who plays for the Big Ten championship game. It could determine who goes to the college football playoff. That's why I say if Michigan wins this game being ranked 3rd, then I think both Michigan and Ohio State get in. As long as Michigan wins the Big Ten championship following that. But if Ohio State wins this, unfortunately, I don't think that Michigan's going to be able to get in because they're 3rd. I think, again, that 2 and 3, this is where that does matter, being ranked there. Ohio State's a 7.5-point favorite. That's at 12 o'clock on Fox. So we get to learn that early. We don't have to wait until the night slate to be able to figure out who's going to make this. Which team is it going to be? But that's going to be a big one there at 12 o'clock. Then at 12 o'clock as well on ABC, you got South Carolina at number 8, Clemson. Clemson 14.5-point favorite. 3 o'clock, you got number 25, Louisville, traveling to Kentucky. Kentucky's actually a 3-point favorite at home against Louisville. 3:30, you get the 3:30 CBS game. Auburn at Alabama, the Iron Bowl. Number 7, Alabama, 22.5 favorite actually. Oregon State. Michigan State, Penn State. LSU A&M. LSU a 10-point favorite on the road at Cal Field at 7 o'clock on ESPN. UCLA, that don't even matter. This is another big one here, 7:30 on ABC. At the Coliseum, you got number 15 Notre Dame against number 6 USC. This could be the determining factor for USC being able to get in the playoffs. They are right there on the outside looking in. Georgia takes care of business against LSU in the SEC championship game. If Ohio State takes care of business against Michigan and maybe puts them out, all of a sudden USC might have themselves a spot to be able to slip in there, especially if TCU struggles. Doubt they fall this week, but possibly in the Big Ten championship game or Big 12. So something to look at there. Number 10, Tennessee. By the way, Tennessee also lost last week very badly to South Carolina. At Vandy, again, like I said when I was talking about that, Tennessee's only a 14-point favorite on the road at Vandy right here, and there's a reason. Vandy is trying to get bowl eligible. They're 5-6. This is similar to what it was last week against South Carolina. South Carolina didn't have life, and all of a sudden, hey, they came alive. That one's at 7:30 on SEC Network. Kansas State. Washington, Wazoo. That's the big ones. That's what we got this weekend. I did at least get the picks pulled up for us. There we go. Make sure it swaps. I did kind of go a little heavy with it again. I've got Georgia. Give me Georgia. Again with that 45-3 pick on it for me. Or 44-3. That's 33.5. That's covering that. So give me the spread. Georgia versus Tech. Clean old-fashioned hate. I got to bounce back because, again, 2-6 last week dropped me all the way to 43-38. Hey, I'm still in the plus, but I'd like to be a little better. South Carolina at Clemson. I'm taking South Carolina in the points plus 14.5, but I really don't know. I wanted to pick South Carolina in the upset completely, but I don't know. Clemson kind of looked a little bit better offensively. Again, it was against Miami last week, and South Carolina came alive, but the last time South Carolina came alive against a team, they all of a sudden didn't look all that great the week following, and I think this could be a potential trap game for Clemson where South Carolina does come in there and take care of business, but I also think this is a game that could be just like that time South Carolina looked really good and then didn't the week after. So I'm at least going to take South Carolina with the points, but I don't really know who's going to win this one, so I'm only going to have 7 picks this week. Florida at FSU. Give me FSU minus 9.5 all day long. I don't think Florida stands a chance in this football game. I think FSU has looked so much better. FSU should have won the past 2 weeks, or past 2 years against Florida in this rivalry, and I think they take care of business this year for sure. So give me FSU and give me that minus 9.5 on them as well. Michigan at Ohio State. This is the one that I keep looking at week in and week out and seeing the difference in these two teams. I think Michigan does it again. Again, their track record is not. It is not in their favor. This one at 12 o'clock. It's not in Michigan's favor at all, but I think Michigan does it. Again, on the road at Ohio State. Give me Michigan plus the 7.5. The only good thing is Michigan doesn't pull it out, but they do pull it out by a touchdown, or only lose by a touchdown. I still at least cover the spread. But I'm taking Michigan. I think everybody keeps talking about Ohio State this, Ohio State that. Listen, I don't think Michigan's quarterback is necessarily the greatest thing. Michigan's running back is. Now, if he's not healthy, all of a sudden, probably not the smartest pick because I don't know that he is right now. Blake Corum, I believe last I checked, was not healthy in the last game. I don't know that he's playing in this football game. If he doesn't play, all of a sudden I could definitely be eating my words on this for Michigan over him because offensively, running the ball against Ohio State was a huge difference in that football game last year, and it could prove to be the difference in this one as well. But if he's not healthy, I don't know if they can continue that. But regardless, I'm going to stick with them. Give me Michigan plus 7.5 in that one as well. So that's it. That wraps us up. That recaps us from Kentucky. That previews us for the clean old-fashioned hate going on this weekend against Georgia Tech. Now that I finally Googled that and remember what in the world it was called, because, again, for the life of me, could not remember what in the world it was called. But regardless, it is what it is. Every time I start saying this, you guys all know, hey, he must be coming to the end of the show because now he's just starting to say words. And it is what it is. So there you go. Hey, Dawgs on top this weekend, 45-6 or 45-3 against Georgia Tech. I look forward to seeing that as we wrap up the season. We wrap up another college football season and get prepared at least for the postseason. You know, bowl games. We got championship game next week. We'll preview all that good and fun stuff next week when the time comes. But again, I appreciate you guys listening. If you guys don't mind, check out the YouTube channel there. Make sure you like and subscribe. And wherever you guys are listening, if you want to support the show, make sure you click the link in the description. And also, if you guys don't mind listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you guys listen, make sure you rate and review. Give us that 5-star rating and leave a review, and I'll make sure to read it on the show upcoming. I'll check in with you guys after Georgia takes care of Georgia Tech this weekend. Go Dogs.